Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Nairobi Ideas Podcast, a podcast that gives a public platform to the Kenyans changing the world with their big ideas. Nairobi Ideas Podcast is brought to you by the Mawazo Institute, a Nairobi-based research institute focused on female thought leadership and public engagement with research. I'm your host, Dr. Rose Mutiso, CEO of the Mawazo Institute. We are excited to launch the Nairobi Ideas Podcast as part of the 2018 Africa Science Week Kenya. For our first few episodes, we'll be chatting with scientists from our Faces of Kenyan Science campaign. This is a multimedia, multi-platform campaign featuring 20 Kenyan scientists who showcase the diversity of Kenya's contributions to the global scientific enterprise. We'll be sharing stories of their work and scientific journeys through a number of creative outlets, including this podcast. So today's guest is Kago Kagichiri, co-founder and former CEO of Eneza Education, a leading mobile learning platform with presence in 3 African countries.
Hey, Rose.
Thanks for joining us. You are our first ever Nairobi Ideas podcast guest. I'm very excited. This is one when we go big. I don't know. Should I give you shares when we do an IPO?
Oh yes, please. Just mention that I was somewhere in the area.
You're in on the ground floor.
Yeah.
So Kago, I mean, you're a really interesting guy, and I where to begin? Let's maybe start the early years. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where do you grow up? Where do you go to school? What kind of things interested you? Or, trying to get a picture of how and why did you end up where you are? Early days.
Sure. So I grew up in Ongata Rongai. That's in Kajiado County, for any people who do not know.
So not in Nairobi, FYI. My mom actually lives in Kajiado, like you, in Rongai.
I grew up in Ongata Rongai. I went to school locally there. I was very lucky to be in a good school. I mean, that we still performed top 20.
What's the name of the school?
In the whole country. It was called Olerai.
Uh-huh. And this is an 844 government school?
844 private school.
Uh-huh.
Started by a Maasai family that was quite prominent in Rongai. But yeah, it definitely had very different sort of like discipline from what I've seen in most primary schools. I also was very privileged to grow up with computers. My dad was an engineer, so ever since I could walk, we had pretty much the computers which were like briefcases where when you open the briefcase, that was like the keyboard. You put one like floppy disk for the operating system and one for the other. So I grew up with computers, and I naturally had an interest for doing stuff on the computers. Not much gaming, but just like seeing whether I could make the computer do what I wanted. And so the kinds of things that interested me when, in 1995, my dad started, I think, probably the first privately owned cyber cafe in town. And so that's... 1995.
I'm like, did the internet even exist in 1995?
It did. It was when you dialed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, this is crazy because I think like the first like web search engine was barely invented in 95. I think Yahoo came in 94.
Yeah, Yahoo was the king then. Google was not even.
So what was even the infrastructure? Like, who are the internet service providers in Kenya in 95?
There was only one. I mean, it was the government. And then there was Africa Online, which was also sort of had a lot of ties to the government. I guess they had made, because they were so early in the game, they were sort of like a government partner. So I think my dad's cyber cafe was like the first sort of like hustler, entrepreneur.
And this cyber cafe, I swear, was it in Rongai? If the first cyber cafe
No.
would blow my mind.
It was at Jethalal Chambers in town. And I remember back then browsing for 15 minutes used to cost you 6,000 shillings.
Wow.
People didn't know how to write emails. So it was also a service to like type people's emails and like send faxes. It was pretty like, pretty old school, very old school sort of like internet eras.
Awesome. So, I mean, those are kind of very unique tech beginnings for the times and for the place.
Yeah.
So then maybe bringing it back to the present, what are you working on these days?
So these days I'm just trying to use tech, for very useful, practical situations. I mean, because I was introduced to the internet so early, I started coding maybe when I was about, 7, 8. And for 7 years, I pretty much tinkered with technology, which means I was just building stuff just for the sake of building it. And then I think I got bored with that. And so, the only logical step was then to create tech to help people. So, while I was in school in Starehe, I sort of built like a very basic Facebook Messenger before Facebook Messenger actually existed. Later, with my best friend, we went to build on a magazine management system for Insider.
A Facebook Messenger for Starehe?
No, it was just for high schoolers.
Oh,
so
wow.
back then, it used to cost 10 shillings for an SMS, 20 shillings for a megabyte. And a megabyte is pretty much, 1 million characters. So essentially you could send tons of SMSs over the net. And I remember we had an argument with my dad because he was like, how are people going to know that they have a message waiting for them because you don't have any way to notify them via SMS? And, I think when we saw this grow from like 5 people to like 30,000 people in like 2 weeks, we realized that, the internet was something that would actually pull people on.
Okay.
And so
this is, I'm trying to imagine this 844 high school, boarding school, people don't have phones. It's the early 2000s.
Yeah. Like the best phone was like the Nokia 6030. That sort of like Nokia, which looked like an egg and had like a color screen.
So as you're creating this,
one.
who are the customers? Who are the clients? Like, who is even when you're envisioning this, like who are you making this for?
So I was the client, right? This is high school Form 2. You want to talk to the girls, and this 5 bob SMSs, man. Back then, before even like the Xaxa and all that stuff, like you had to make sure like you were using that 160 characters. And so for me, I was like, how can I do more? And obviously like 50 shillings of airtime was crazy to ask, from my dad. And so I figured out, let's build this platform. And pretty much we're going to make it cheaper to send text over the internet than sending text.
So before you were like creating tech to save the world, you were creating tech to dart chiles.
Yes, I guess. And I help my friends, wingman for all my high school people.
Okay, so then fast forwarding now and what you're doing with Eneza, how do these pieces fit together?
I think the pieces fit together because I worked a lot with people who didn't understand how to use technology, right? Even the high schoolers basically who used our platforms, they didn't know how to use the internet. But because of the value proposition that we were presenting them, where you can send 2,000 texts for the cost of 4 SMSs, I think sort of that's where I found my niche of like helping people discover really what tech can do for them. And I did that, between 2008 and when I started Eneza in 2011. Credit Reference Bureau, buying Safaricom stock via SMS, buying all kinds of shares, monitoring your portfolio. It was really sort of like whatever. I think I learned that whatever you can do on the internet, you could do sort of like with very simple tech. And I think it made me very, very happy to do that. Just sort of like the amount of value you can get in devices that, people thought couldn't do anything.
Then, you've had all of these different ventures and experiences. So then how did you settle on EdTech? Maybe now would be a good time to tell us a little bit more about Eneza, what it does, what the platform is, and as part of that, like why ed?
Yeah. I can just tell you the founding story. So it's basically, my co-founder was, a white lady working in Muhuru Bay with the community, trying to create sort of like better educational outcomes. And I felt really challenged by this because, someone from Rongai, thinking like, how would I ever like show up in Muhuru Bay all the way in like Homa Bay? And this lady like dedicated, 2 years of her life just teaching. And, she didn't like tech in the classroom because as a teacher, she felt like technology should be sort of used away from the classroom, and it should be, classrooms should be meant for sort of like that quality student interaction. And I felt very differently in terms of, I felt like, classes should be only tech and like very little like human interaction. So it was a very interesting meeting when we met at iHub in Nairobi through a friend. She wanted to build something like this. And, based on all my experiences, both in building tech for people who've never used tech before. And, I had a lot of difficulty with school because for me, I didn't believe that, putting someone in a classroom for 7 to 8 hours, or in university, the fact that it's showing up to class that was sort of like the first thing that was tracked. I believe that things should be more remote, and so what came from that is we created a very simple math, English, and reproductive health bot. The reproductive health bot was because we wanted to debunk some myths. So a lot of the students thought like if you stand upside down, for example, that you'll lose your pregnancy, and so we were sort of like creating this content just to tell young people that, hey, I know you're hearing a lot of things, but this is actually sort of like the truth, around this, and this is the curriculum around that. And that grew basically into what Eneza is today, with lessons and assessments in all subjects, all the way from class 4 to form 4, in all subjects in pretty much three countries.
Okay. Congratulations, because you guys have millions of users, right? Which is pretty incredible. But where does the tech meet the content? Because creating the platform is one thing, and, it's a versatile platform. You can use it, the same kind of general concepts to create a chatting service for people to like talk to the chiles, or you can, use it for, to message with people with educational content. But like, it seems like a lot of the work is in the content. Absolutely. How do you guys do that?
Absolutely. So, we have a very different model from a lot of other ed companies. I mean, in a lot of countries, you'll hear people saying that we don't want to hire teachers to create content because teachers are already being paid by the government. And Eneza took a very different approach. Obviously, we wanted to, give teachers more income. So we found the top teachers in school. We had them sort of learn how to create content for 160 characters. When we had the partnership with Safaricom, we could essentially now make it, 400, 500, 1,000 characters, because with the model that we created with Safaricom, you basically pay 10 shillings for unlimited text. And so we had the teachers create the content, and the teachers could work remotely, and we paid the teachers sort of per content created. And then the teachers would also double up as sort of like the chat tutors for our students. So it was based on, empowering teachers and giving them income to be able to basically support, way more students through a very, very easy medium.
I mean, that's great. I'm glad you're supporting Kenya's side hustle culture.
Oh yeah. And obviously, I mean, the other thing with Eneza is that I had to figure out one platform that figures out everything, right? I mean, textbooks can't scale in the way that SMS can scale. And so for me, it was very important that, with very few people, you can essentially change the lives of many, many more.
One thing that I've been observing, and a kind of keen observer of tech in kind of different, social contexts, like achieving different social goods. And in the ed space, and actually I think broadly in all the, tech for health, for med, for education, for all of these things, to what extent do these tech solutions kind of displace, disrupt, or are complementary to kind of the traditional brick and mortar, traditional approaches to education? Is it possible for Eneza to kind of displace the need for traditional teaching and all of that?
Yeah, I think that's a controversial question, right? I mean, I think all tech could, very well, replace talent. But, as you see in the med field, tech is being used to diagnose cancer, not essentially do the treatment. And I think as technologists, we also have to think about how we're onboarding people onto automation, because very fast automation also creates, anxiety. And I've seen this sort of in the company as well. I mean, our company was very lean because, we automated extremely well, but we also had to have the element of training people how to sort of work with automated tech. And so for us, we thought it was extremely complementary. I mean, I didn't want sort of to change anything, politically. I feel like when you start changing the curriculum, it's a political thing. I mean, we obviously had our extra content where students could learn about being, being a gentleman, even when you're adolescent. It means that you don't throw your strength everywhere. But I think those are just things that more debunking myths and things that kids need to know. But, we looked at what are the difficulties of, in the classroom. And one was students are sharing textbooks. Teachers don't give individual feedback. I used to be in Olerai. I used to get a lot of individual feedback because the school wanted to also tutor the very top students. And I was thinking, and if I wasn't a top student, I wouldn't get that extra tutoring. And so how could we essentially automate that for a lot of other students? So it was sort of a virtual teacher's assistant. And we thought if we're going to sort of start to take people's work from them, we're going to make it extremely organic so that those people are finding sort of new ways of teaching students and using our platform instead of just coming and saying, well, now a student doesn't use a teacher anymore.
Okay, so who is your typical user? Is it a student by themselves at night, at home? Is it a teacher who is using Eneza?
Yeah, so we have four typical users. One is a student. So the student is primarily taking content to be able to sort of fail faster, right? I think the value proposition to students is that they can fail so much on the platform that even in class you can see their confidence grow up, and so they don't have to feel bad or be scared to answer questions. The second person is the teacher. So we actually have content for teachers on the platform, and we have over 50,000 teachers who've taken sort of this new classroom management course, just because we realized that there's not a lot of teacher development that happens after the education degree. The third person is the parent, obviously. So we have sort of campaigns which are geared at changing parents' behavior on how they're involved in education. And this is primarily around winning airtime and school fees. Mm-hmm. And through that, we found that, hey, parents are winning 10 shillings because the student did something. And then parents now start to care, or what is the person doing on the platform? And then we find parents calling us and saying, okay, how do I do this with my student? And we really like that. We've even found homes where all three daughters in the home sort of want school fees for the mother because they'd wake up, one would wake up at 2 a.m. To 9 a.m., the other one from 9 to 2, the other one from 2 to 9.
This is child labor.
It's not, it's not child labor because they're studying, but when you talk to the students and you ask them, how does it feel? Yeah, how do you feel sort of being able to participate in your school fees? You can see sort of a sense of fulfillment because they didn't have to do sort of anything that they're not supposed to do. There was essentially just through doing the things you're supposed to do, we can sort of create this world of abundance. And I thought that was really cool.
That's really cool that you found ways to incentivize involvement because a lot of these solutions are like, very motivated teachers, parents, students who opt in. And this is a way to kind of broaden that net to make everyone kind of incentivized to go in.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so one thing I always try to have kind of like take the long view, like a spectrum view of kind of progress, right? So looking backwards, looking forwards in ed and tech. I was thinking, EdTech is something that has existed for a long time. Obviously, in our day, the EdTech was like a logbook.
Yeah.
For those kids out there, a logbook is how would you describe a logbook? It's a computer that is just tables on a piece of paper.
Yeah, it's like a paper abacus, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like that movie Hidden Figures, where the computers were humans. In this case, you're the human who's the computer sweating, calculating things during KCSE exam. Yeah. People have been kind of attempting this kind of improving education and adding kind of educational aids and tech, right? And now obviously we've had this like massive tech revolution and all of these different EdTech solutions, Eneza being in that spectrum are part of it. But looking forwards, like what are we seeing? Like in this kind of long line of kind of EdTech that, includes the logbook, the abacuses and the logbooks, the computers, the graphing calculators, the messaging, interactive remote learning platforms. Like what is this all building to?
I mean, that's a super, super interesting topic because, I met with my friend who runs a Blipper, and it's like an AR platform where augmented reality platform where basically you can point your spectacles at anything and it'll pretty much tell you what it is. And the argument we're having is that if you have sort of spectacles that can calculate and do all this stuff and tell you what you need to know even before you know it, whether it's looking at a chair that's broken and reordering one or telling you how to drive on the road, I guess what will be the things that people need to learn, right? And I think that's sort of like automation in the sense that the logbook became the calculator, became the computer, became the phone. I think what we're seeing, and you mentioned it I like that you mentioned the logbook, is that, the brains of the young people are going to be very different from ours, right? I mean, the logbooks created synapses in our brains that these kids are just never going to have. They're going to be more consumers of information and searchers information instead of sort of like creators of, the new way to calculate stuff. That's probably already been done. I think what is more exciting to me is I think the place that people have to actually add value to the community. So in the same way that these kids sort of like help their mom create school fees, I believe that's collaboration. I don't think that's child labor. I'd call it collaboration. And I think what we have now, as much as our technology is advanced, is a lot of kids still being told, you're the future leaders of tomorrow. The first time someone manages their finances is when they've sort of got their first job after university. And I think for me, what we need to challenge is that paradigm, right? Is how do we start getting collaboration, with students at much younger levels. So some of our students, for example, they take our Ask a Teacher platform and they run sort of like this neighborhood study groups. And so you find that an 8-year-old essentially is a teacher. I don't know if they're charging other children or not, but like basically an 8-year-old has taken up the leadership today and is able to use a skill that they know, or even just a platform that they use, a tool to be able to help others. And I think that's sort of what I'm looking at in the future of education. I think it's just how quickly we onboard our kids onto skills, right? I mean, for me, like for my child, if I could look back at my own growing up, I feel like maybe it could have made a difference if I was given the school fees check to go and deposit at the bank. I think that would maybe have given me some level of awareness as to what's happening. But we're sort of like hiding these kids, I guess, trying not to get them to grow up as quickly. But again, I think there are opportunities to sort of like bring kids into sort of like problem solving. And I think that's probably what, if someone figures that out, that's probably what's going to win in education.
Okay. This is, I think you put that really succinctly, this idea, it's not knowing the how, but the why, because the how will be kind of pretty much done for us.
Exactly.
Really cool. So I think bringing things to a close here, this is the Nairobi Ideas Podcast, and we're really trying to get to the heart of kind of people and their ideas. And we've talked a lot about you and your ideas, but, taking it up to the stratosphere, highest level. What is the world that you dream of? What is the vision, mission that fuels you? Like, what is your big idea? What are you working towards?
Again, I think my big idea is just around, making sure there's no inequality of skills between Africa and the rest of the world. I mean, for me, I got a pretty good head start in coding. And I feel like up to, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Africa was pretty much at the level with other countries until machine learning came along, which was like very crazy math. math, right? Like this is not the stuff you can sort of like self-teach yourself. Like math, you'll probably have to go and learn, some really crazy, algorithms to be able to sort of like execute machine learning well. And I feel like that's sort of like what keeps me up at night, right? It's that we have a lot of people coming into the country with a lot of skills, but those skills are not leaving, right? And I think the future for me is a future where sort of like any child at a very young age can access content to at least excite them about sort of like these big things, like where the world is moving, whether that's medicine, whether that's neuroscience, whether that's machine learning and all this stuff. And I think the kind of world that I dream is a world where, if you look at a community like in Meru, a student wakes up, goes to school at 2 p.m., they leave school, a group of students and the lecturer go out and they work in like in the community. And, nothing like physical labor, but you have students like doing customer service. You have students doing like helping with stock taking. You have students sort of like helping sort of like with some of the soft skills that you'd expect. So that for two things. One is that a student maybe is 14 years old and they've already worked at like 7 businesses. And so they have sort of like that business mindset. And the second thing is that when they want sort of to start something, instead of going to Nairobi, they can get together with the other students and be like, okay, we have now worked in this sort of like area, or we've interned in this area. What can we do more for our communities? And I think that's a very important note to make, because I think, I've always sort of like identified with Rongai. I've never like needed to identify like with Nairobi or anywhere else. I always feel like very close to home. And I think everyone needs sort of that ownership. Otherwise, what we get is just like this rural to urban migration that will, it'll move the progress, but I think people need sort of just more ownership of like their own communities and how they can add value there.
Okay. This is really interesting, because I think that one criticism sometimes of like the various kind of imposition almost some people think of tech in kind of lives in different contexts is, how does it connect to your everyday life? So these kind of lofty concepts like AI and neuroscience, and you're just a kid who's like has to wake up and work in the farm before you go to school. How it's, there's this like a tension between, every kid should be curious, the whole universe should be open to every kid, and everyone should, has a stake in being interested in the lofty ideals. But then how does that connect to your everyday reality? And I like what you're describing about it's all interconnected.
Exactly.
Looking forward while being grounded and connecting to where you are.
Exactly. I think if we give our young people a chance to be fulfilled, I think it's more fulfillment. I feel like, even in my tenure at Eneza, I felt extremely fulfilled. Anytime I had a really hard time, I just go and ask a teacher, and like answering 3 questions would like give me energy for like another 3 months. And I think it's that idea. It's like if we give young people a way to have real world applications of stuff, and that could be like in their community, right? I don't think, if I knew my neighbor's child was at a certain like kiosk, let's say during piloting this sort of like internship program, I'd probably go to that kiosk more than I go to others, because I know that I can also sort of like see by myself that this child is learning how to smile all day, irrespective of like a customer's attitude, right? And I think that's what we need to give our kids. We need to give our kids opportunities to collaborate and extremely aggressively. Otherwise, tomorrow, this leadership of the future tomorrow thing, that will never come. And we already have kids doing it. And I think we just need to, share those voices, share those stories, and get everyone listening more. And I think in Africa, we also have, it's not a loophole, but I think in Africa, because kids have been working, and this is now like proper child labor, without sort of governments looking at it, I think we do have a framework where we can create sort of like a new type of sort of like soft skill work that would probably not be possible in first world countries. And I think that's an opportunity we should be looking at right now.
Yeah, sometimes I think just growing up, like having to nawisha, like, the guests, like when guests come in, you go, you greet them, you help them wash their hands, you know how to interact with like a very senior aunt, uncle. Like we had all of these almost semi-professional customer service skills kind of ingrained from such a young age. But then I think that was kind of paired with be seen, not heard, a fear of like, it was a double-edged sword where you have to do these kind of build these soft skills, but you're also terrified. And so how can we...
Exactly. How can we change that narrative? And I think if we do that, I think Africa has a chance to completely supersede, some of the first world markets, because there, you can't even touch, some of those areas. They're just like very black and white. And in Africa, there's sort of like this gray area that we can turn into like different colors, I'd like to say.
Awesome. Okay. This has been really great. Kago, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I wish we could go on forever. I think there's so much here to flesh out. And so I really urge our listeners, if you ever find this man on the streets, pull him aside, buy him a coffee, force him to talk to you about all of these.
You can find me on
really
LinkedIn. LinkedIn maybe closer than the streets.
You don't want people just random strangers buying you coffee on the streets? Okay.
No, I mean, not on the streets. I think LinkedIn is better. I like meeting people first on the screen, and then I can stalk you. And then I can invite you for the streets.
All right, guys. I've rescinded my request. You do not have permission to stop this man on the streets and harass him. Add him on LinkedIn. What are you on Twitter? What's your website?
I mean, I'm mostly active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn pretty much. But my Twitter is Kulemantu. So just like the way it is, Kulemantu. I'm a bit active there. But if you want to have like a conversation, I like having conversations with people, I think LinkedIn would work.
Awesome.
Really well.
Thanks. Yeah. All right. So very final question. And this is, again, another one that we'll be asking all our guests, kind of closing reflection style. So it's a little bit cheesy, but I think it's still a helpful thing to ask people who do cool things. So what is the most important advice you'd give your younger self? And I want you to frame it in terms of one thing you would tell your younger self to stop doing, start doing, continue doing.
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of one thing you should keep doing. I mean, I think one thing is, standing up for your own ideas and chasing your highest excitement. I feel like, the times that I was, very depressed in life, I'd look back and say, why didn't I obey, or why didn't I conform? Why was I always asking why and why? But for the times that it's really working out, you can really sort of connect the dots. And I think by chasing my highest excitement, it allows me to, when I'm doing something new in life, always look back, and I always have resources, people I met, relationships I built, and they always sort of help me towards something. And I think if I didn't drop out of school, if I, or do something that sort of I was struggling with, I feel like that area of my life would be sort of a blank place where I might not have been able to leverage stuff.
So keep following your highest excitement.
Yeah, keep following your highest excitement.
Even when it's not fitting the expectations.
Yeah.
A mismatch.
It will definitely make sense later.
What would you stop doing?
What would I stop doing? I think to my younger self, I think I'd stop trying to look for problems, right? I mean, let me put it like this. So a lot of the things that have motivated me is people telling me you can't do stuff, right? And that really motivated me. My dad was like, well, this platform's not going to work. People were all my life I've almost sort of just been the most motivated when people tell me I can't do something. And obviously when you sort of have something going and now people are looking to you and telling you, Kago, everything's great. It was actually very hard for me because I'm okay, where's the voice of something can't happen? Everyone's telling me, Kago, this vision, we're going to do it. And it was very, very hard for me. And I think for me, that's what I'd have said is look for also things that, motivate you positively, right? Yeah. Education was I have to build this, tech thing because, if we don't, this rampant burning of schools is going to be rampant something else, right? And so it's I've really learned how to change that view and almost then turn that view into positive of okay, what if we roll out apprenticeships? Or then we can, create healthier communities where people have more fun seeing each other working and stuff like that. So I think that's what I'd have told myself to change.
That's actually a really great kind of flipping, doing the same thing.
Yeah,
kind of
it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You just have to change sort of your perspective.
So
and
less contrarian
positive.
And more kind of additive.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
And what would you start doing?
What would I start doing? I think building healthier relationships, right? I mean, for me, my life has been a very lonely life. I mean, obviously, because I've spent probably 70% of my life behind a screen, and I think it's got me where I need to be. But also, a lot of my some relationships have suffered just because when I'm sort of into building products and building these things, a lot of my friends will say it's Kago has a new girlfriend, right? It's he wouldn't talk to you. He wouldn't do that because Kago loves picking up problems and solving them. And I think what I'm starting to do is now sort of try and build healthier relationships, try and sort of invest in people instead of investing myself because I'll be able to finish the ideas. It's building communities around me who can learn sort of from what I've been able to do and can also sort of jump in and solve stuff with me.
Okay, that's really great. Though tech mediated relationships, so LinkedIn.
Yeah.
You're not ready to jump too much intimacy. Not quite ready.
Yeah. Step by step, organic. Let's make it organic. Even with my co-founder, for the first, we were introduced to a friend, but for for the first 6 months, we never talked face to face. I mean, I told her, don't call me on the phone. Yeah. I don't speak on the phone. I'm very much.
I've really, being back in Kenya, I've had to really get used to talking on the phone. I just like texting emails. Actually, I prefer emails. And most people I find locally don't do emails. So I'm also kind of stretching myself, but still being true to myself. So I still prefer text-based communication a lot.
I mean, I think we're in a chat generation, and the next generation is definitely gonna, value chat more than voice. But I think just like the logbook, I think I'm still sort of, I've lived enough in the age where people talk to people that I'd want to build that definitely much more.
Awesome. That's all we have time for. Thanks so much for joining us, Kago.
Thank you, Rose,
this has been a really fun conversation, and I, very much look forward to all the amazing things that you have in store for you and all the ways that you will change our society with your big ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I've been working with education. Now we're doing something in energy. So I mean, hopefully, the next few years of my life is going to be sort of like killing kerosene, killing charcoal. So yeah, I've got another big problem to solve.
Well, let's talk about that. That's what I work on the side.
Nice. Yeah,
awesome.
Let's definitely chat.
Let's talk energy. Okay, next podcast.
Podcast. Yeah. Energy in Africa.
All right. Thanks so much. If you want to listen to this episode again, or if you want to hear more from the Nairobi Ideas Podcast in the future, you can find us online permanently at www.mawazoinstitute.org. And for the next few weeks, you can also find us at www.africascienceweek-kenya.org. You can also subscribe to the Nairobi Ideas Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Big thank you to our sponsors, the L'Oreal Foundation, Johnson & Johnson Innovation, and the Next Einstein Forum. From all of us here at Mawazo Institute, thank you and keep it nerdy.